The sign outside read, Hayes Auto and Salvage, the letters barely clinging to the rusted tin above the garage. Inside, under the flicker of a half-dead bulb, a man with oil-smudged hands stood alone beside a worn-out Ford pickup, wiping his brow with the same rag he used to clean carburetors. Logan Hayes, 37, mechanic, single father. A man whose dreams had been replaced with late-night repairs and silent prayers over unpaid bills. But tonight, he had exactly one thing left in his possession. That was his half-a-turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper, still slightly warm from the lunchbox he hadn't touched since noon. He stepped outside for air. The sun had long since slipped behind the rooftops, leaving behind a sky the color of old denim. And that's when he saw her. Before we continue, while you're lying comfortably, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really enjoy what I have to share here. And if you're listening in the middle of the night, please comment and let me know where you are and what time it is. Now turn off the lights, turn on a fan for some background noise, and drift off into the night. She sat against the dumpster, legs tucked close, head bowed like she was trying to disappear into the shadows. Her boots were torn. Her coat didn't match the season, and yet her eyes, when they flickered upward, didn't ask for anything. Logan paused, looked at his sandwich, then looked at her again. "Hey," he said softly, as if louder might scare her off. "You hungry?" She hesitated. He broke the sandwich in half, walked over and extended his hand. "It's not much, but it's warm." Their fingers didn't touch, but something passed between them anyway. Kindness, maybe. Or the kind of recognition that comes when two people who've known hunger, not just in the stomach but in the soul, see each other for what they truly are. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't know he had just given her his last meal. Not because he was trying to impress her, but because that's just who he was. And tonight, that mattered more than he could possibly imagine. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she held the half sandwich in her hands like it was something sacred, like warmth itself had weight. Crumbs fell into her lap unnoticed. The wind curled softly around the alley, bringing with it the sharp scent of old rubber, and something else, something almost like comfort. Logan had already turned away. Back under the hood of a Dodge neon sleeves rolled brow, furrowed, mumbling to himself in that way men do when talking to machines feels safer than talking to people. But she kept watching him. From behind the steam of a slow bite, she noticed the way his hands moved, not rough and fast like someone tired of work, but careful, respectful, like he owed the machine something. And when a little boy ran in holding a broken plastic car, Logan didn't grumble. He knelt down, took the toy with a smile, and said, "Let's see if this one's got another mile in it." 10 minutes later, this toy was working. The boy was laughing. And Logan, well, he just went back to his engine like it had never happened. She saw all of it, and later when Logan walked over to a photo taped to the cabinet, a snapshot of a girl in pigtails holding a wrench twice her size and gently tapped it with grease-darkened fingers, the woman blinked hard. Because in that quiet moment between a sandwich and a socket wrench, she realized this man hadn't saved the food for himself. He had saved his softness. Somewhere in her chest, something shifted, but she said nothing. Just stood, placed the sandwich wrapper carefully in the trash, and disappeared into the night. She hadn't told him her name, and he hadn't seen her eyes linger longer than they should have. But she had already begun writing a story about him in her mind, a story that wasn't over, not even close. The next morning came with a sigh. Logan sat at the small kitchen table of his one-bedroom apartment elbows on a laminate surface scratched from years of elbows before his. The coffee was instant, the bread was dry, and the rent notice on the fridge was now aggressively red. His daughter Ellie slept in the corner nook, where he'd built her a makeshift bed out of stacked blankets and love. She was 9, brilliant, stubborn, and always hungry for cartoons, for questions, for reassurance he didn't always know how to give. He looked at the last $2 in his wallet, folded with care as if reverence could make them multiply. He tucked them away. That afternoon, he returned to the shop, tools in hand, heart heavier than his toolbox. It was just another Tuesday until the delivery guy showed up. "Double order from Benny's Deli," the guy asked. Logan frowned. "I didn't order anything." "Well, it's paid for." The man shrugged, handed over 2 neatly packed lunches, and left before Logan could argue. One had roast beef and arugula, the other grilled cheese and tomato soup, Ellie's favorite. He could have kept both, could have called it fate, luck, maybe even grace. But instead, he set one lunch aside, scribbled, "For the shelter" on a piece of masking tape, and gave it to the courier when he circled back. "Make a stop on your way," Logan said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And that was it. No fanfare, no witnesses. Just a mechanic, his daughter, and a half-warm sandwich. He didn't know she'd been watching from across the street. Didn't know Lena, still in the same worn boots and borrowed coat, had followed her instinct back to the place where someone had treated her like a person. And now she was learning what kind of person he truly was. The rain came just after sunset. Not the dramatic kind that slams rooftops and makes headlines, but the slow, uncertain drizzle that soaks you quietly, like sorrow that forgot how to shout. Logan stayed late, even though there were no cars left to fix. The shop had become more sanctuary than workplace, a place where silence didn't demand explanations. He wiped down tools he couldn't afford to replace, adjusted shelves no one would notice, and waited, though he wouldn't admit it, for a reason to stay. The reason arrived just after 9. She slipped in through the side alley, shoulders hunched, eyes darting like she hadn't yet decided whether she wanted to be seen. This time he didn't speak. He simply nodded toward the back room, a small space with a dusty recliner, a humming mini fridge, and a microwave that had seen too many frozen burritos. She hesitated at the threshold. "It's dry," he offered, almost as an afterthought. "And no one checks in after hours." Still, she hesitated. Then she saw it taped to the wall above the microwave, a child's drawing. A stick figure man with a wrench and a red cape standing next to a tiny girl with purple pigtails and the words, "My dad fixes everything," in careful, crooked handwriting. She stepped inside. Logan tossed her a blanket, clean frayed but warm, and turned to leave. But before he did, he paused at the door. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice low, unguarded. "But if you need something, you don't have to look like you're disappearing to ask for it." She didn't answer, but she did sit down slowly on the recliner. For the first time in days, maybe longer, she exhaled without bracing herself. Through the cracked blinds, lightning flickered distantly, illuminating the darkened garage with brief, ghostly clarity. She saw his silhouette move back to the workbench. He saw nothing at all. And just like that, two strangers, bruised by different storms, shared a space between them that neither of them could name yet. But it was growing, like trust, like rain. The radio played softly in the corner, more static than song. It was tuned to the same station Logan always used, something local, low volume, just enough to fill the quiet with something other than thoughts. He didn't notice the news segment start, but she did. Still no word on the whereabouts of Lena Maddox, the elusive heiress to the Maddox Industries fortune. The family has declined comment. Sources say she may have gone off-grid voluntarily. Some call it a scandal. Others call it a test. Logan tightened the bolt on a distributor cap, the wrench slipping once, just enough to nick his knuckle. He cursed under his breath, sucked the blood, and kept working. She sat still in the recliner, barely breathing. Known for her sharp mind and colder demeanor, the radio continued. Lena Maddox was set to take over the family's philanthropic division. But since her disappearance 3 weeks ago, rumors swirl from mental breakdowns to undercover stunts. No confirmations, only questions. Logan switched the dial mid-sentence to an old blues track. "I don't care how rich someone is," he muttered, disappearing without a word. "It's a lousy way to treat people who care." She flinched, not visibly but inside. She hadn't meant to hear that, hadn't expected the weight of his words to hit like they did. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that she was the subject of that news bulletin. The woman in the worn boots, the quiet eyes, the half-smile that never reached too far. Lena Maddox. She'd been living under borrowed names, cheap motels, silent train rides, and no eye contact. She was testing people, watching how the world treated someone without polish or title. So far, the world had failed, except him. The man with a grease-stained hoodie and a soul that hadn't hardened just to survive. She looked over at him now, this stranger who had offered warmth, food, and silence without price. And she wondered if he had any idea just how rare he was. Spoiler, he didn't. But she wasn't done watching. Not yet. The next morning broke without ceremony. Gray skies, damp sidewalks, and the scent of burnt coffee lingering in the shop like a promise no one intended to keep. She was already gone when Logan unlocked the door. But something small and folded sat on the workbench, a napkin from the local diner down the block. Inside, a $10 bill and a note in precise slanted handwriting. "For the sandwich and the blanket, L." He stared at it for a long time, then shook his head, smiling faintly. "She thinks $10 covers kindness," he murmured, tucking the napkin back in place like it was made of glass. That night she returned. Same coat, same silence. But this time she stood at the threshold longer than usual, as if debating whether the welcome was still valid. It was. He nodded again, the same quiet gesture, the same soft permission. And when she stepped inside, the air between them felt less unfamiliar, like a room remembering a song it once knew. This time she brought 2 paper cups of coffee. One for her, one for him. They didn't speak at first, just sipped. Steam curled between them. Then finally, softly, she asked, "Why'd you share your food?" He shrugged, eyes on the engine he wasn't really fixing. "You looked hungry. People usually walk past. People don't usually sit still long enough for me to notice." She tilted her head. Still doesn't answer the question. He met her gaze, calm, unbothered, honest. "I didn't give it to get anything back," he said. "Didn't feel like charity. Felt like the right thing at the right time." A pause. "Unless you are secretly rich," he added, teasing with a slight grin. "In which case I'll take a yacht instead of the $10. She laughed unexpectedly, genuinely. The sound surprised even her. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. And the first time he had looked at her like she wasn't just a passing storm. What he didn't know was that she wasn't just grateful. She was taking notes. Measuring him not by what he said, but by what he gave when no one was keeping score. And for the first time in her carefully guarded life, Lena Maddox wasn't entirely sure who was being tested anymore. The next few days passed like whispered chapters in a story no one else seemed to notice. Lena returned each evening, always just after dusk, always with a quiet nod and 2 coffees, hers black, his with cream and too much sugar. Logan pretended not to look forward to it, but the way he wiped the chair beside the workbench before she arrived told a different truth. They didn't talk much. Sometimes she would read a newspaper someone had left behind. Sometimes he'd ramble about carburetors and how newer models just don't breathe right. And sometimes on the gentler nights they sat in silence, so comfortable it made words feel unnecessary. But outside, the world had begun to take notice. On a Thursday morning, a man in a charcoal gray suit showed up just before opening. Polished shoes, an umbrella that had never seen real rain, eyes that flicked over the shop like a checklist. "You Logan Hayes?" he asked, voice clipped, practiced. Logan wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Yeah, can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone. A woman. Early 30s, slim build, maybe going by a false name." He paused, then added as if it meant something, "She's important." Logan's brow furrowed. "I don't know anyone like that. Sorry." The man studied him a little too long, a little too hard, and left without another word. But it unsettled something. When Lena came by that night, Logan didn't mention the visit. He wanted to. The words sat heavy behind his teeth. But she looked tired, hollow in a way he hadn't seen before. So instead, he offered her the last slice of lemon pie from his lunchbox and asked if she'd ever fixed a spark plug. She didn't eat the pie, but she smiled at the question. That night, she left earlier than usual. And for the first time, Logan locked the door behind her with a strange ache in his chest. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was running from. He just knew that whatever it was, it had finally found its way to his door. The shop smelled different that morning. Not the usual mix of rubber and metal and old coffee, but something colder, cleaner. Like someone had opened all the windows and let the world in just to see what it could take. Logan knew something was off the moment he walked in. Daryl, the shop manager, stood by the counter with arms crossed and jaw tight. 2 other mechanics were pretending to look busy, but their sideways glances gave them away. "You got a minute?" Daryl asked, though it wasn't really a question. Logan nodded, wiping his hands before they'd even gotten dirty. They stepped into the office. The door closed behind them with a thud that felt heavier than wood. "I've had 2 people stop by asking questions about you," Daryl began. "One in a suit, one in a uniform." Logan didn't flinch. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's not the point," Daryl snapped. "It's the image, Logan. We've got a business to run. You've got some drifter sleeping in the back, eating off the shop's goodwill, hanging around like this is a halfway house. She wasn't hurting anyone. You don't know who she is. And now we've got customers whispering, people calling. And I've got a garage full of workers wondering if we're hiding a fugitive." Logan's voice dropped, steady, controlled. "She's just someone trying to stay dry. Someone who needed a little kindness." Daryl sighed. Kindness doesn't keep the lights on. The silence that followed said everything. 15 minutes later, Logan walked out of the shop with a small box of his tools and no job. No reference, no severance, no second chance. Just like that one act of decency had cost him his livelihood. He didn't call Lena that night. He didn't have her number. But even if he had, he wouldn't have. Because that's not why he helped her. Still, when the garage closed and the rain began again, he stood outside a little longer than usual, staring down the alleyway where she used to appear, coffee in hand. But she didn't come. And for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt cruel. The apartment was quieter than usual. Ellie had fallen asleep early, curled into her blanket fort with a flashlight and the same book she'd read 3 times this week. Logan sat at the edge of the couch, hands steepled, staring at nothing in particular. The job was gone. The bills were still there. And in the back of his mind, a quiet question kept whispering, Did I make things worse by trying to do something right? He reached into the fridge, pulled out the last soda, and stood in the dark kitchen wondering if pride could be used to pay rent. Then a sound, soft, barely there. A slip, a shuffle like paper brushing wood. He opened the door. No one was in the hallway, but on the floor, nestled against the frame, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. No name, no stamp, just a single initial on the back L. He brought it inside carefully, like it might break. Inside, a gold pendant, small, simple, etched with a tiny emblem, a feather curling around a flame, and a handwritten note. For now, thank you for not asking who I was. Thank you for just seeing me. Keep going. You fix things. Maybe now, something can fix itself for you, L. Logan stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what it meant, didn't recognize the emblem, didn't understand how something so small could feel so heavy. But later, much later, when Ellie woke in the night crying from a bad dream, and he held her until she calmed, the pendant lay quietly on the table between them, catching moonlight like a secret the world hadn't earned. What he didn't know was that the pendant was real gold, and worth more than 2 months of his old salary. But that wasn't what made it valuable. What mattered was who had left it, and why she was about to disappear again just long enough to change everything. 3 days passed. Logan didn't hear from her again. No envelope, no message, just silence, and that golden pendant sitting like a puzzle on his kitchen shelf. He'd tucked it inside an old coffee mug, the kind people stop using but can't quite throw away. Every time he reached for his keys, he saw the edge of the chain, and every time he paused. Then one morning a letter arrived, not shoved under a door, mailed. The envelope was thick, embossed with a subtle swirling crest in silver. Inside was a formal invitation, parchment paper, perfect calligraphy. Mr. Logan Hayes, you are cordially invited to the annual Maddox Foundation Gala, Saturday evening, 7:00 p.m. Formal attire requested, parking complimentary. Your attendance has been personally requested by Ms. Lena Maddox. He read it 3 times, then flipped it over to make sure it wasn't some elaborate prank. Lena Maddox. The name hit like a slow echo. He sat down hard, invitation trembling in his hands, trying to connect the dots. The news report, the pendant, the coffee, the laughter that didn't quite belong to someone used to being invisible. No way that Lena Maddox, billionaire executive, whispered about recluse, was the same woman who'd worn borrowed boots and slept in his back room. But the handwriting matched. The L was the same. And deep down, he already knew. Saturday came faster than he wanted it to. Logan didn't own a suit. He borrowed one from a friend who worked at a funeral home. It smelled faintly of lilies and linoleum, but it fit well enough. He combed his hair back, shaved carefully, and stared at himself in the mirror like he was meeting someone new. At 6:58, he stepped into the gilded lobby of the Fairmont Grand, all chandeliers and soft music and waiters with perfect posture. No one looked like him. He didn't care. He handed over the invitation. The man at the check-in desk scanned it, looked up with a flicker of curiosity, then gave a slight nod. This way, Mr. Hayes, she's expecting you. And just like that, the doors opened, not just into a ballroom, but into a truth he hadn't been prepared to meet. Because across the room, in a sleek navy gown and a sea of light, stood Lena. Not the girl in the alley, not the woman with the tattered coat, but her as the world had always known her. And now she was walking toward him. The ballroom was a cathedral of light. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, scattering reflections across polished floors and whispered conversations. Guests clinked champagne flutes with casual elegance, their laughter echoing like bells down marble hallways. Logan didn't move at first. He stood at the edge of it all, his worn shoes quiet against the floor, the borrowed suit suddenly feeling heavier under the weight of too many glances. He didn't belong here. He knew it. They knew it. But still, he stayed. Because across the room she was walking toward him. Lena Maddox. No disguise, no coat, no coffee-stained napkins. Her hair was swept back in soft waves, her posture poised yet unguarded. She wore no crown, but the space around her bent with recognition. People turned, parted, watched, not because she demanded it, but because she was the moment. And then she smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for cameras or shareholders, but the quiet, startled kind. The kind that happens when you see something familiar in an unfamiliar place. The kind you give someone who once handed you half a sandwich in the dark. Logan, she said when she reached him. Just that. Like his name belonged here all along. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, so, you are secretly rich. Her laugh was soft, a spark between them. I was never hiding that part, she replied gently. I was hiding the rest. Around them, the crowd began to whisper. That's him, someone murmured. The mechanic. The one she's been talking about. What's he doing here? Lena ignored it. She leaned in slightly and said, I wanted you to see me like I saw you without expectations, without judgment, just as I am. He swallowed hard. And now, she said, stepping back, I want the world to see you the way I did. She reached out her hand. He took it. And just like that, Logan Hayes, who once had nothing but grease on his hands and hope in his pockets, stepped into the center of a world that had never made space for him. Until now. Until her. The lights dimmed slightly. A soft chime rang out, the kind that signaled attention without demand. A voice took the microphone at the far end of the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could ask you to take your seats, Ms. Maddox would like to say a few words. Lena didn't let go of Logan's hand. Not until she reached the center of the stage. She stepped up, elegant, composed, but somehow more human than anyone had ever seen her. Not the cold executive whispered about in boardrooms. Not the heiress painted in tabloid ink. Just Lena. She adjusted the mic, looked out at the sea of pressed suits and jeweled glances, then paused, a breath a choice. When I disappeared, she began, her voice clear but low. People assumed I was avoiding something: responsibility, grief, maybe even scandal. But I wasn't running. I was watching. She scanned the room slowly. No cue cards, no polished speech, just truth. I wanted to know who people were when no one was watching. When kindness had no price tag. When there were no cameras, no consequences, no reward. A ripple went through the crowd. I wore clothes you'd never expect, slept where no one looked, walked into places where I wasn't seen, or worse, where I was seen as something less. Most of what I experienced broke my heart. Then she smiled. But one night a stranger offered me his last sandwich. No questions, no conditions, just a quiet kind of humanity. Later he gave me shelter, not because he had plenty, but because he saw I had nothing. She turned slightly, her gaze locking onto Logan in the front row. And when I tried to repay him, he laughed, said, unless you're secretly rich, I don't want anything back. Soft laughter rolled across the room, warm and surprised. Lena continued, that man didn't know who I was. He just knew who he was, and that's why we're here tonight. She gestured gently. The spotlight shifted, and suddenly all eyes were on Logan. There was no clapping yet, just silence, reverent, stunned, leaning forward. This is Logan Hayes, Lena said softly. He lost his job because he let me sleep in a garage. He gave away food he needed, and he never once asked for my story because he thought mine mattered less than making sure I felt safe. A beat. He passed the test the rest of the world didn't know was happening. And because of that, tonight isn't about me. It's about him. Now the applause came. Not loud and explosive, but steady, rising, heartfelt. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Some whispered his name like they were learning it for the first time. And Logan, he didn't stand yet. He just sat there, stunned, a little overwhelmed, holding the invitation in his lap like it was still too heavy to believe. Because no one had ever applauded him before. Not for being strong, not for surviving, not for being decent. And now for the first time the world was watching, and it saw him. The applause faded, but the feeling didn't. Logan stood only because Lena reached for him, not to pull him forward, but to steady him. He wasn't used to cameras, or applause, or silk-covered hands holding his with such deliberate care. The gala resumed, but the air around them had changed. Conversations turned quieter, glances softer. Even the most polished guests now looked at him with a strange new curiosity, the kind usually reserved for legends they'd never met. But Logan didn't care about any of that. He only looked at her. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly, once the crowd had turned its attention to dessert and champagne. Lena tilted her head. I know. That's why it mattered. She handed him a small envelope sealed with the same emblem etched into the gold pendant, the feather and the flame. What is this? He asked, turning it over. Something overdue. He opened it. Inside a deed. Not just a piece of land. Not just a garage. An entire auto shop paid in full, retrofitted, rebranded, and registered under the name Hayes & Daughter Auto Repair. He blinked. What? It's yours, Lena said simply. You don't owe me. You already paid in a currency the world rarely honors: kindness with no agenda. Logan's fingers trembled. Not because of the gift, but because of what it meant. It meant no more second shifts in borrowed garages. It meant Ellie would have a room of her own, not just a fort in the corner. It meant building something not just for himself, but for every version of him the world had once overlooked. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Don't, Lena replied. Just open the shop, fix things, and let people see what goodness looks like when it finally has its own roof. A pause. Then almost playfully she added, though, if you want to name a sandwich after me on the grand opening menu, I wouldn't object. He laughed loud, real surprised by how easily joy returned when you stopped expecting the world to steal it. Across the ballroom, Ellie ran up to him, cheeks flushed, curls bouncing, eyes wide. "Daddy," she said breathlessly. "Is it true? We're gonna have our own shop." He knelt down, showed her the deed, and nodded. "Yes, baby," he said, voice thick. "Ours. Finally ours." And as she wrapped her arms around him, Lena stepped back into the crowd unseen again, just for a moment, letting them have the spotlight. Because tonight wasn't about power. It was about passing it on. Long after the last flute of champagne had been cleared, long after the lights of the gala dimmed, and the polished shoes found their way back to marble driveways and silent chauffeurs, Lena stood alone on the balcony, barefoot, holding her heels in one hand and the night air in the other. She could still hear the applause, still see Logan's stunned expression, the way he looked down at that deed like it was something too delicate to own. But that wasn't the moment that changed her. No. That moment had come weeks before the night she sat on a concrete floor behind an auto shop, half a sandwich in her hand, and watched a stranger treat a child's broken toy with more respect than billionaires gave their boardrooms. That was the moment. The test she thought she was conducting to see if anyone in the world still acted without cameras or contracts had turned on her. She'd begun with the arrogance of the powerful, assuming she could judge the kindness of others like an equation. But Logan, he didn't play her game, because he didn't know there was a game. He didn't ask for her past, didn't expect a future, didn't reach for her pain just to fix it. He simply saw her hungry, cold, and human and offered what he had. Not out of pity, but out of principle. She'd walked away from a world of glass towers and marble halls, not because it was unbearable, but because it had become hollow, soulless, curated. But in that tiny garage with mismatched mugs and a flickering radio, she had found something the Maddox estate had never taught her to value: authenticity. And it had undone her. So when she gave Logan that envelope, it wasn't charity. It was correction. A way to set something right in a world that had gotten so good at rewarding noise over sincerity. Back inside, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored hallway gown, flowing hair, swept face poised. But in her eyes, something softer lingered. Something real. And when she finally slipped out the side door, no entourage, no security, no flash, she felt lighter than she had in years. Because sometimes the richest thing you can do is to leave the world a little better than how you found it. And she had, by letting one good man be seen. 6 weeks later, the garage reopened. Not just a garage, but his. The rusted sign was gone, replaced by clean lettering on polished wood. Hayes and Daughter Auto Repair. Underneath, in smaller script, it read, "Fixing what matters most." Logan stood in the doorway that morning, keys in one hand, coffee in the other, watching Ellie arrange wrenches by size like it was an art exhibit. She wore a little cap with the logo printed across the front, and a grin that hadn't left her face in days. The walls inside still smelled faintly of oil and lemon-scented cleaner, but now they also smelled like beginnings. People had started to show up even before the grand opening. Old clients, new faces. Some came for an oil change. Some came just to say thank you for being who you are. One woman dropped off cookies. Another handed him a letter she'd written but never sent about her own father, long gone now, who once fixed cars with the same kind of kindness. And as Lena pulled up quietly in a hybrid sedan, no spotlight, no announcement, Logan met her at the door with nothing more than a nod and a smile. She stayed for an hour, helped change a tire, spilled brake fluid on her blouse, laughed about it like it mattered less than the company. Before she left, Ellie gave her a handmade bracelet and whispered something into her ear. Lena's eyes glistened, but she didn't say a word, just hugged her tight, the kind of hug that promises to come back even when no one asks. Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the last customer waved goodbye, Logan stood in the garage with the lights off, watching the sky turn a deep, contented blue. No applause, no headlines, just peace. And that after everything was more than enough. Because in a world that often forgets the quiet heroes, sometimes all it takes is one moment of unnoticed kindness to change everything. So if you're still listening, still with us in this final minute, let me tell you something simple. The world doesn't always reward good people right away, but goodness finds a way back, eventually, quietly, and always in the right hands. Thank you for joining us here at Social Justice, where stories like Logan's remind us that the smallest gestures can echo the loudest. If this story moved you even just a little, take that feeling with you. Pass it forward. And maybe share your last sandwich someday. You never know who you're feeding. Until next time, stay kind and stay awake to the good.